hiding nearby.
Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. Two things you should know. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, and murder is a crime in every country that I can think of. There's been an 8% increase in gun violence since Joe Biden took office. Now, Biden wants to reverse this trend, and he wants to counter the Republicans on his poor record on gun terror. So on the 23rd of June, the president announced what he calls a no-tolerance policy to gun violence.
Does anybody remember how keen we all were in the West to destroy white rule in South Africa and to allow black people to take control of the country? After all, South Africa is possessed of almost unlimited material wealth in the form of raw materials such as diamonds, gold, uranium, all sorts of other useful things just lying in the ground waiting to be dug up. Why should a minority enjoy all the prosperity from those riches? Surely if Nelson Mandela could be freed and a Western-style democracy established, then South Africa would become a shining beacon to show what a black African nation could achieve when it was set free. This, at least, was a story that people in Europe and the United States were fed, and many of them believed it. Of course, some people were a little dubious because they recalled vividly what had happened when Rhodesia was handed over to black rule back in 1980. It led to a hideous dictatorship, a bitter civil war, and the country was reduced to a basket case. Rhodesia, or Zimbabwe as it is now known, is indistinguishable from any other black African nation, that is to say poverty-stricken and corrupt. But with all its resources, surely the same thing could not happen to South Africa if black rule was introduced to the country. Here are a couple of random facts about modern South Africa which viewers may not have come across. They might not have heard about these things because since the release of Nelson Mandela, nobody is keen to talk too much about South Africa unless a much-loved figure like Archbishop Desmond Tutu dies, somebody associated with the struggle for freedom.
Where authorities have failed to find the cause behind the death of 21 people at a local bar in the city of East London. The police informed the press that they have completely ruled out stampede as a cause behind the death, which was being speculated earlier. A police spokesperson said on Monday that it must be something that the victims ate, drank, or even inhaled that led to the deaths. Many hours after the incident, the police were still combing the tavern where the teenagers died under mysterious circumstances. Meanwhile, special investigators from Pretoria were also rushed to the scene on Monday. 17 bodies were found inside the bar while 4 others died while undergoing treatment at a hospital. The police confirmed that all of the victims were teenagers and the youngest of all was aged 13. 31 others were hospitalized with symptoms including backache, tight chests, vomiting and headache. Officials said that most were discharged on Sunday and only 2 were still in hospital. Meanwhile, fresh reports came up during the day where survivors recount their battle to escape the jam-packed premises. At least one of the survivors reported passing out after a suffocating smell filled the crowded space.
I sometimes wonder if those who rule over us have ever studied history or absorbed any of its lessons. I'm thinking of one lesson in particular, and that is the difference between ethnically and culturally homogeneous societies and those where large minorities are to be found sharing a country which has a different religion, language or culture from them.
Most survivors and eyewitnesses reported that the place was jam-packed with people and that the crowd was unruly and difficult to manage. Families of the deceased expressed shock and grief over the incident. A prayer meeting was held for the victims in East London City on Monday.
Tougher background checks, ban on assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and boosting community policing. On the face of it, these are supposedly tough measures. But will they deliver any result?
Let's look at one or two instances of this since the end of the Second World War. India, of course, always had many Hindus and Sikhs and a very large number of Muslims as well. They managed to avoid killing each other too often as long as the British were there to keep control of things. But when the British left, there was the most ferocious bloodshed and ethnic cleansing involving millions of refugees and millions of deaths. At roughly the same time, in the late 1940s, the Arabs and Jews in Israel were fighting each other. As with India, as long as the British were there to come down hard on the Arabs and Jews murdering each other, things just about were kept in check, and the Arabs and Jews managed somehow to live side by side. Once the British left, there was mayhem. Loads of killings, loads of refugees.
My anger is towards the nature of what happened, you see. And if somebody took the responsibility of caring about more especially the children, you're not supposed to allow children to enter that area.
States that encourage, assist or commit homicide are called rogue, a term often used for these countries. Now I want to show you a video and I want you to take a wild guess and tell me where it's from.
In 2020, 688 9- and 10-year-old girls gave birth in South Africa. If a 9-year-old girl had a baby in Britain or America, it would be front page news and a scandal of the first magnitude. It is so common in South Africa that nobody even notices. There are roughly the same number of people in South Africa as there are in Britain, say 60 million, give or take a few million. Imagine, if you will, that every year in this country almost 700 children aged 9 and 10 were to have babies. This really isn't something one can readily picture. The general assumption is that this is happening because of financial grants to mothers in the country. In other words, families get their children pregnant for the money. The fact that 46% of people in South Africa are without work, that is to say nearly half the people in the country are either seeking jobs and cannot find them or are not even looking for work. The grant for a new mother can be a vital source of income, even if the new mother is only 9. The dreadful poverty in the country has caused fierce riots and even more seriously is now beginning to destroy the country's infrastructure.
This is not El Salvador, this is not Honduras, not Venezuela, not even Virgin Islands or Jamaica. This is the United States of America. What you just saw is terrorism.
What about Cyprus with its 80% Greek and Greek Christians and 20% Turkish Muslims? How did that work out? Anybody remember? What about Nigeria with the Yoruba and Igbo? Anybody remember the Biafran War in the late 1960s? More recently, one thinks of Czechoslovakia breaking into two separate countries, the Czech and Slovak republics. And also, of course, we have Yugoslavia and the dreadful fighting between the Muslims and Christians, Croats and Slovenians and so on. Then there's Northern Ireland, of course, and South Africa. In short, setups when the country has, for historic reasons, large portions of its population consisting of people speaking a different language from the majority or following a different religion, with different customs, dressing differently and so on. Such countries often contain the seeds of conflict and strife, which can, in extreme cases, develop into civil war. None of this happens in countries with a homogeneous culture and ethnicity.
When terrorists attacked a school in Afghanistan in May this year, America called out the quote-unquote senseless targeting of innocent civilians. In 2020, at least 10 schools in America were attacked. How did Washington respond? By doing nothing. Let's rewind some more. In 2019, at least 441 people were killed because of gun terror in America. In 2018, 322. Total number of people killed in the last 4 years, 1,620. How did the US respond? By doing nothing.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa expressed his condolences to families of the victims in a tweet. He later said he was worried about the circumstances under which young people, at least some under the age of 18 years, were allowed to gather at the tavern. It is illegal to serve drinks to minors in South Africa. Liquor license of the tavern was revoked on Monday. South African township pubs, commonly known as taverns or shebeens, are sometimes located in family homes where alcohol consumption is allowed and safety regulations are rarely enforced.
Under White Rule, a magnificent rail network was built up. This has gradually deteriorated since the end of the apartheid regime. During the lockdowns, though, associated with COVID, it was practically dismantled by those taking advantage of the absence of security guards and other staff. 80% of the country's railway stations have now been completely destroyed. Cables, metal railings, windows, doors and even roofs have been stolen. Walls have been demolished so that bricks might be looted and used to build huts in shanty towns. It is impossible to say whether the railway network will ever recover from these attacks.
2,900 plus people had died in 9/11, and in response, America invaded Afghanistan. But more Americans have been killed by guns at home than in all its wars abroad. The First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the so-called global war on terror. What is Washington doing about it? Nothing. Any idea why? Because the fault line is at home. America does not like acknowledging it. The Constitution of America gives every American the right to bear and carry arms. As a result of which, today you have more weapons in the US than people. 393 million firearms for 327 million people. And this is just the official figure. The US has 4% of the world's population, but 46% of the entire stock of privately owned arms. This is more than the next 25 countries combined. Why do so many Americans need arms? But this logic evades America when dealing with terror at home. Gun terror in the US has become a silent genocide. African Americans make up just 13% of the US population, but they account for 58.5% of the lives lost to gun homicide since 2017. 82% of black adults in the US say gun violence is a problem. Only 39% of whites agree. American leaders have failed to address this systemic discrimination. They have failed to protect their own, failed to disarm domestic terrorists. When the US invaded Iraq in 2003, George Bush told the Congress the military action was needed to disarm Iraq in pursuit of peace, stability and security. Well, why didn't the White House follow the same script at home? In 2011, when America entered Libya, President Barack Obama said the military action was a must to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. In 2012, while speaking about the deployment of US military personnel in Uganda, Obama said, US combat-equipped military personnel are working to protect local populations. Well, what about protecting the locals at home first? In 2016, Obama mandated federal licenses and background checks for those dealing with firearms at gun shows or online. $63.49 billion. If American civilians dropped arms, how would manufacturers like Sturm, Ruger and Company, Smith & Wesson survive? If American presidents sign strict gun control laws, how will they survive the political force of powerful gun lobbies like the NRA, the National Rifle Association? What's playing out in America is appeasement politics, and it is flowing from the barrel of the gun. This is America prioritizing gun rights over human rights, and the result looks like this. Gun terror at bars, concerts, schools, places of worship, shopping districts, iconic places, even the Times Square. Just in May, a 4-year-old girl and several others were shot at in Times Square. You know, had this been anywhere else in the world, the United States would have issued a travel warning, would have been the first to do so. But what is the White House doing to ensure the safety of thousands of tourists and students who travel to America every month? Today, 48% of Americans see gun violence as a very big problem in their country.
What about all the wealth from those gold mines and the diamonds and other minerals? Little has found its way into the country as a whole, obviously. One may assume that the same thing has happened in South Africa as in the other black nations of Africa. This involves Swiss bank accounts and greedy and corrupt politicians. The history of sub-Saharan Africa may really be summed up as follows. When Arabs and Berbers from North Africa crossed the Sahara and explored Central Africa, they found people still effectively living in the Stone Age. They then founded Muslim kingdoms in such places as Mali. The picture was pretty much the same when Europeans sailed to West Africa, although there were large towns built of mud, ruled over by dictators who made a fortune from the slave trade. In the 19th century, Europeans taught the Africans to build, to write, to learn, and to do all those useful things which have been of such benefit to Europe and Asia. By the middle of the 20th century, it was thought that the African nations were ready to go it alone. When the white rulers withdrew, a slow descent to barbarism began in most parts of sub-Saharan Africa. It was worse in some places than others. One thinks of the Belgian Congo and Rwanda, but always the trend was inexorably downward. South Africa is simply the latest example of this phenomenon. This is why it's really bizarre to see countries like Britain and Ireland actually setting out quite deliberately to create such situations by inviting to their countries large numbers of people with completely different cultures, belonging to different ethnic groups and practicing different religions. It's almost as though they are trying to set up the kind of situation which existed in Yugoslavia or Cyprus. This would be hard to explain. There are then two possible reasons for what we see. The first, of course, is that our politicians are a bunch of turnip heads with no understanding of history and who don't care what happens after they're out of office in a few years. Or that there is some wicked plot to destroy our countries. At the moment, I tend towards the first of these explanations, but I do see why some people think that it's a deliberate plot and that nobody could be so stupid as to do this without realising the inevitable consequences.
Here's what we say. The solution sounds that simple, and it needs political will. The strength to face hard facts, undo historical wrongs. They cannot coexist. And I repeat, had it been anywhere else in the world, America would have been the first to flag this mismatch. And it's high time America drops the hypocrisy.
Around me, whoa.